I think Kamala Harris needs a catchphrase.
Ooh, yes, definitely a catchphrase.
How about this? I'm just off the top of my head. I can do this all day.
What about something punchier like, ooh, boom?
You looking for this?
Iron Man 2, everybody loved it.
Okay, again, I think we're just trying to get out the vote.
Kamala forever. That's better.
Okay, how about I'm down with democracy? It's just clean, it's simple.
Okay, I like that.
It's hard to argue with that.
Kamala Harris, down with democracy.
Oh, yeah. I'm Kamala Harris, and I say down with democracy.
After Osho, a foreigner to this country, used his to bus in thousands of homeless people to vote in his favor during a local election, the Federal Election Commission ruled that it did not violate federal election laws. Voter is as old as voting itself, and voting machines have been designed to make it easier.
After witnessing election irregularities associated with the U.S. presidential election, we decided to direct time and resources to also links to U.S. and global election. It is indisputable. Smartmatic Election Systems was created at the direction of now deceased Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez, and its source code, the basis of its operating system, developed jointly by Venezuela's Consejo Nacional Electoral and Smartmatic, was designed to allow election results to be altered without the knowledge of voters and the public.
Colorado Secretary of State Jenna Griswold posted a spreadsheet that listed the password of the state's voting systems. And after she was caught, she said it's not a security threat.
To be very clear, we do not see this as a full security threat to the state. This is not a security threat.
This is not the first time that your office has made mistakes that have damaged voters' confidence in our elections. In 2022, your office sent out mailers to 30,000 non-citizens inviting them to register to vote. They, of course, are not eligible to register to vote. That same year, your office used Colorado's ballot tracking system to send messages to specific Coloradans encouraging them to vote when in fact they had already voted, causing confusion that had to be cleaned up by the county clerks. And now this leak of the voting system passwords. Given your office's repeated errors that have damaged confidence in our elections, which you say is paramount, will you resign?
Absolutely not, Kyle.
And now we are seeing videos of voting machine glitches. At this year's DEF CON conference in August, hackers found security gaps in voting equipment, but it hasn't been fixed. But voting machine is old news. The new election tool is non-citizen voters. Catholic Charities have not only been managing the illegal border crossings, they have been registering them to vote. Groups of non-citizens have been seen early voting with the help of NGO handlers. The Texas elections chief told poll workers to give ballots to people who show non-citizen IDs. And while the Supreme Court decided to allow Virginia to remove non-citizens from voter rolls, the poll workers are being instructed to submit a special form for them to vote, which will tie results up for another week after Election Day.
Signed up to work this November 5th election poll here in the county that I live in Iowa. I wanted to see firsthand for myself if illegal immigrants are actually being allowed to vote. This is what we've been instructed. Even if they say that they're a U.S. citizen, and I still question it, any of us question it, they still are allowed to vote. They will be given this. This is a provisional ballot. Basically what that means is you still get to vote. The voting stops at 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, however many of these provisional ballots that we have, those are accumulated and then they are all shoved in an envelope together, sealed, and then they go somewhere else. They have from November 5th through November 12th to bring information to verify that they're actually a U.S. citizen. Let me repeat that. They have until 12 p.m. on November 12th to present the proper identification to prove that they're a U.S. citizen.
I don't understand how we got so toxic and just so divided and so bitter, and I get why sometimes people just don't want to pay attention to it.
So when you look at where this situation is, just a few days out now, with the breadth of your history of covering politics, so many people say that there's a lot of tension across the nation, that this is a unusual environment, that the country is so divided. How do you see it just 6 days out, Hugh?
Well, on a personal level, I've got lots of lefties in my family, and we're not mad at each other. We're voting different ways. So I think sometimes there's a tendency to overstate deep divisions within the country and confuse that with very close elections, which this is. On the other hand, I told my lefty family members that I think the vice president is the worst presidential candidate of a major party in my adult lifetime, meaning she lacks the skills to campaign and communicate. And I wouldn't be surprised if she got blown out Tuesday night. I wouldn't be surprised if it's close. I wouldn't be surprised if she wins by a little bit in the Electoral College. The only thing that would surprise me if she wins by a lot, because she's such a bad candidate.
So when you look at all of these numbers that we're all poring over all the time, and this morning I was reading a piece with the political director for the Trump campaign, and he believes that their ability to bring out the low and medium propensity voters, people who never vote or rarely vote, he says we are beating them on this measure, and that he thinks that is their ticket to winning, because they're just like they did in 2016 when they found rural voters who no one had paid attention to and they brought them into the fold. These are voters who might be young men, might be black men, Hispanic. These are the groups that they're digging deeper into. What do you think of that strategy?
I buy it. 3 Hours with Joe Rogan hits a demo that does not listen to my radio show and does not perhaps watch a lot of Fox News cable. They listen to Joe Rogan because it's kind of wide open, rolling. It's often vulgar. It can be profane. It can often funny as can be. But it's not the demo for seniors. It's not even the demo for 40-plus women and men. It's the demo for young men. And so Donald Trump went right to the heart of the demo for young men, and he won them over because it was a great 3 hours. I mean, I don't know anyone in politics who can do 3 hours without a major flub. And there was none. He made a lot of points. He didn't make a major flub with Joe Rogan, who is a very talented, stiletto-wielding interviewer. So I think he is going to turn out people. I'll also add, I was watching my beloved Cleveland Browns beat the Ravens this Sunday, and up pops a 2-minute Donald Trump ad that's just a contrast ad that's magnificent. Now, the Browns-Ravens game is aimed at football fans, and they come both in men and women, of course, but they're particularly young men. And I thought, well done, well played, Mr. Bond. So I think they're running a flawless messaging campaign to that demographic that typically doesn't engage. And I think on Election Day, that could account for close polls turning out to be broken polls. If they haven't modeled the electorate correctly, they're all going to be bad.
So there is obviously a big gender gap if the polling is correct. And whenever I have asked President Trump or the Trump team about that, they say, you know what, women care about the same things that everyone else cares about. They care about the economy, they care about national security. I think that's true. However, I thought it was interesting the other night that Nikki Haley said that she had not heard from the campaign since June, and that she had essentially, offered to be helpful in any way that they might want. What do you think about the fact that they haven't taken advantage of that?
Well, I think there are other women who have been better surrogates for the former president, including Sarah Huckabee Sanders, for example. People who came to the convention spoke on his behalf. Gold Star mothers are the most powerful surrogate you can have. He has a lot of them, all from Abbey Gate, of course, coming forward. I would have liked to have seen Nikki Haley. I went down and saw the ambassador in New Hampshire, and I was up in Maine this summer because I like to go to the early primary events in New Hampshire, and she's very impressive. But I did see her appearance yesterday, and I was impressed that she said, she's voting for Donald Trump. And I'm not surprised not to see her as a surrogate, though, because there was some tension, but she's voting for Donald Trump. That's the bottom line.
I think about the tension between JFK and Lyndon Johnson and others who have found ways to, make amends. And I guess I'm a little bit surprised that there wasn't more of an effort there. A lot of people thought that maybe they would bridge the gap and even run together. That would have been a very clear, extended hand to college-educated women voters. So what signal do you think that sent to them?
I don't think it sends a signal to college-educated women voters because Sarah Huckabee Sanders is one. I had on Deb Fischer, senator from Nebraska today. She's another. She's fully in Trump camp. Senator Joni Ernst is a third. She's fully in the Trump camp. Campaigns are tough on personal relationships. I've never run for office. I don't want to because I don't want to have that kind of tension. I don't know if it's on the ambassador's side or on the former and future president's side. That's my opinion, future. But the fact remains, she didn't show up. I do not put a lot of weight on that. I put a lot of weight on the early voting that the Republicans appear to have mastered. Doesn't mean that they're going to win, but it means they're competitive in a key kind of demo, people who want to vote early. And I put a lot of emphasis on the fact that every single poll is statistically insignificant. They're all tied. Doesn't matter if it's up 2 or down 2 for Haley for Harris or for Trump. Doesn't matter. They're all tied because of the definition of statistically insignificant. So I just think it's a jump ball if they've modeled the electorate correctly. And you hit on it early. The people they don't model are the people who've never showed up before, the ones they call them. Sometimes they're zero. People who've never voted before, but they're mad or they're angry or they're intrigued and they show up for the first time. And they can really screw up a pollster's reputation. I remind everyone, I work in part for the Washington Post. 4 years ago in Wisconsin, a week before the election, like this day 4 years ago, the ABC Washington Post poll said Wisconsin would go for
Biden.
Joe Biden by 17 points.
Yes.
17 points. And he won by 0.6. So polls can be very wrong.
You know, I mean, that's going to be the biggest story of the night, no matter what, right? It's either going to say, okay, they finally figured out how to model Trump voters, or it's going to be, you know, a shock the other way. What do you make of all this early voting effort? Because I keep hearing, you know, different states where they're just blown away by the early voter turnout, and many Republicans who work on these campaigns are telling me that they feel really good about the early Republican turnout.
It shows a machine. That's what it shows. It only matters in Nevada. Sean Trendy is my favorite political analyst, PhD, wonderfully smart statistician and lawyer. Sean pointed out Nevada votes between 80 and 90%, sometimes over 90%, early by mail. And therefore, the fact that the Republicans have built up a 40,000 vote advantage with only 2 or 3 days left in the Nevada early vote means that Republicans are in a very, very strong position to win that state for Donald Trump. It doesn't necessarily make it so because it's RD and I. It doesn't tell you they voted for it. It tells you RD or I. But they've never led by 40,000 coming back. John Ralston is another analyst of Nevada. Sure. He doesn't want to say it because he's kind of a Democrat. But it looks really good for Republicans. I mean, really good for Republicans. But that's the only state where the actual numbers predict the outcome. What I just take away from it is that the Republicans are much better organized than people have given them credit for.
So there's some new polling today from CNN. You know, just for our purposes, we could, you know, imagine a scenario where Trump wins in North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. He would have to take one of those Rust Belt states. Generally, all of these states tend to fall or rise together. What do you think about the Rust Belt states? Do you think they break apart in this scenario?
No, I think they're all going to go for Trump. And I have a very unusual theory on this, Martha, which is Dave McCormick is a fabulous candidate running for Senate in Pennsylvania, known to me because I'm everywhere in Pennsylvania. I've interviewed Dave a lot. In Wisconsin, Eric Hovde's come out of nowhere. He's really ahead of Tammy Baldwin, I think, in almost every metric that matters to me in terms of small donors and things like that. And Tammy Baldwin's got a scandal on her hand with her partner's non-disclosure of assets. And then we look at Michigan, we have Mike Rogers. And Mike Rogers is a fabulous candidate, FBI, military, former chairman of the House Intel Committee. So those three candidates have their own machines working in concert with Donald Trump. And I like that combination. So I think they're all going to go for Trump, but I've often been wrong. I was wrong in 2012 and 2016.
So, Hugh, when you look at this sort of in history, right, and you think about the fact that none of us have ever lived through a moment where you have a former president who was gone for 4 years who is running again. So for the first time, Americans are looking at essentially an administration that they know against an administration that they know. What's the impact of that?
The impact is Donald Trump left office with inflation at 1.2%. And since then, it's been a cumulative 20% rise in groceries. That is the key factor in this election, and I'll talk till I'm blue in the face. People have to feed their families. They're paying at least 20% more than they did when Donald Trump was president. They remember all the bad stuff about Trump. Americans don't have amnesia, but they remember an economy that was booming, and they want that back, and they want prices lowered. And the only way to do that, the only way to lower grocery prices is decrease the cost of energy, which means produce more energy. And the guy who's going to do that's Trump, not Harris.
Okay, one last question, which is really kind of the buzzword of these final days. And I think if you'd asked anybody, what do you think the buzzword on the final days would be? They would probably not have said garbage. But garbage was the word from the MSG insult comic who was on several hours before Trump took the stage. I didn't even see this guy, and I didn't know who he was until all of this happened. So I watched it the next day. But that has led to his comment about Puerto Rico has now led to Joe Biden on a Zoom fundraising call last night calling Trump supporters the only garbage that he is aware of. Those are basically paraphrasing his words there. What do you make of the garbage argument in the final days?
I point out that every election cycle has a memorable thing. Mike Dukakis in the tank, George W. Bush, H.W. Bush looking at his watch, John Kerry, I voted for the 87 before I voted against the 87 billion. Every campaign has a word or a phrase or a moment. Right. Garbage is the word for 2024, and that's not good for Democrats. And the president ought to apologize. He ought to really go out there, not correct the record, not say I intended to, but come out and apologize for everyone who heard it. And they've got to hear him say it should be prime time from the Oval Office. We can't have presidents doing that.
What do you think the Harris team feels about him stepping on their moment yesterday of her lip speech?
I wrote in the column, they have to think he's trying to sabotage them. She gave a terrible interview to Club Shay Shay. She's done a couple other terrible interviews this week. She had a decent moment last night, although she said she wanted to defer to the experts. And I thought Tony Fauci and the 51 people who signed the letter about Hunter Biden's laptop, that's not a good line. But whatever she said, nobody knows, because the lead everywhere this morning was garbage.